Welcome back to Beyond the Crime, the podcast that takes you into the minds of criminals with your hosts Dr Lars Madsen, Shay Addison, and Dr Rob Brockman.
Welcome back, everyone, for this episode 2 of Beyond the Crime podcast. I'm here with Lars Madsen and Shay Addison, who are tuning in from Queensland. And actually today, myself, I'm also tuning in from Queensland, happen to be in town.
Yeah, welcome. It's good to see you again. Good to see you up in Queensland. It's been very hot in the last week, so...
And in fact, it's the first time you and I have met in person, Rob, so it's nice to have you here in our clinic. Yeah, we are actually sitting in our clinic, which is called the Forensic and Clinical Psychology Centre in Paddington, Brisbane, Australia.
Yeah, it's lovely. It's a lovely clinic, really good space. So what's on the agenda for today?
Well, today in episode 2, we alluded to it in the last episode. We're going to follow up with trying to apply our understanding of forensic matters and sexual offending behaviour and schema therapy to this big case that's been in the press here, certainly in Queensland and in Australia, with regards to the alleged offending, I must say, by this childcare worker. And it's important, I think, up front that we just caveat that all of this is alleged, because the case that we're discussing, the person has not been convicted of anything. So when we're talking about it, it's important to bear that in mind. So we were going to go through some of the details of the case in terms of this man, because the laws in Queensland have changed recently too. He's able to be identified and his name is Ashley Griffith. So he's the person who allegedly offended against 91 children, young girls at childcare centres in Brisbane, Sydney and in Italy between 2007 and 2022. So we're going to take a bit of a deep dive into trying to understand how do you explain what seems to be unexplainable, and also how might you approach working with somebody from a schema therapy point of view who might present to us
Somebody like this.
Yeah.
Yeah, correct.
So what do we know about this guy from the public domain?
The numbers are quite extraordinary. So 64 children in Queensland and 4 children overseas. The charges include 136 counts of rape, 604 counts of indecent treatment, 613 counts of making child exploitation material, 84 counts of possessing, controlling, producing and distributing child pornography material outside of Australia, 6 counts of possessing child exploitation material, is commonly also shortened to CEM. That's just in Queensland, right? He's also been charged with offences in New South Wales, 23 children, 64 counts of sexual intercourse, 42 counts of aggravated sexual intercourse, 60. I mean, the numbers are just extraordinary. They're just mind-boggling. And I think that in my career of working in a forensic clinical context, I would say that this level of offending is quite extraordinary. I wouldn't say it's unprecedented, because I certainly have interviewed or assessed individuals who get close to this, but thankfully it's very, very rare. Shay, I know that you also have some thoughts about just the level of charges that this...
Yeah, look, I think, just the volume of alleged offending over a period of time, 15 years, and the scope, the environment of the offending, I think, is what's, clearly alarmed the public, which is that it's all happened in childcare centres, where he was a bachelor qualified early education teacher. And he was, in fact, the director of a childcare centre when he was arrested. So that is something that I think it chills people, because he passed all the tests, he's got the blue card, he's got all the qualifications, and yet what appears to have been the case is that he just used these environments, as opportunities to offend. So he's offending what I would call in plain sight, which is a good cover for offending, because people have ideas around safety of people who have qualifications, and they have criminal history checks and all of that sort of stuff. So it is unusual. I also think partly the volume of charges brought against him is because of the digital nature of it. Had he allegedly not filmed things, it's highly likely that much of the offending, would never be brought to light, particularly because the children, as everyone's aware, in childcare centres are often under the age of 6. Talking about kids aged 1 to 5. Yeah. I mean, some of these children are pre-verbal, so they can't they have no memory of it. They can't
speak for
report
themselves.
it. Yeah. So the mere fact that he recorded it actually will be his undoing, I guess. Whereas you might have other offenders who may have offended prolifically, but they just don't have that type of evidence.
This could be
to prosecute.
of course, it's kind of speculation. Like the implication is that if this is all recorded, I mean, what hasn't been recorded? Because as you're saying, all of these charges might be based on evidence.
Yeah, it seems that way. And certainly when you even just look at a timeline of this person as an offender, he's 45 now, and this offending is over a 15-year period, which would pitch him at about 30-odd, maybe late 20s when
he got started.
When it started, and you're sort of like, well, what's happened prior to 30? So in my mind, if I had somebody come along and I was assessing someone like this, it would be very much a focus on trying to understand, that earlier sort of part as well.
Like what they're doing in their 20s when most people are exploring the world, exploring relationships and things.
Correct. I have no doubt the police would probably, I don't know this, but I have no doubt the police would be pursuing that pathway vigorously in terms of their ongoing investigations.
Because people don't tend to get to 30 and then decide to do these things.
No. Someone like this, if we're looking at this as an assessment that comes through the door in terms of having to make sense of it, you would look at this and think, well, this is a person that's been struggling with this long before they started doing it. And I guess the concerning thing about it is, there's so many concerning things, aren't there? The concerning thing about it is that he's clearly had this interest in young children. And that seems to have motivated his decision-making long before he's ended up in a childcare centre, in terms of pursuing a particular kind of education, in terms of pursuing a particular kind of career, in terms of putting himself there. And clearly, when we look at the length of his offending, like we're talking about someone who's been able to hide this offending successfully in multiple locations for a long period of time. He's someone that has been very disciplined in terms of being able to maintain that facade, to groom relationships, not just with the children, but also with the parents and co-workers, to be able to hide this kind of behavior in plain sight and record it and somehow manage to then upload it to the internet in various ways. You would look at this and think that this is an individual that has been struggling with these interests for a very long time before he actually steps.
Now, we don't know, of course, right?
No, we don't.
Case. So
we don't. Typically, when we look at someone who has a pedophilic interest is a sexual interest in prepubescent children usually under the age of 13. And what the research shows is that for many, many individuals who have this kind of problem, they report experiencing this kind of interest emerging in their adolescence.
As a casual observer, one of the things that distinguishes this case from others is it seems that there was a sort of level of planning and dedication and discipline that you don't see in a lot of offenders who might be more impulsive. This is someone who did at least one university degree.
Absolutely.
In order to put themselves in this position.
And you think also about getting the references to be able to apply for jobs and for senior positions within childcare centres. You would have to be able to get, I would presume, excellent references saying that you're an excellent asset.
An upstanding person?
Or the alternative, I think, not an alternative, but one explanation for it is that he's just extremely good at grooming the environment. So grooming children is one thing, and actually the younger children are the easier that is to do, right? Especially really small children who don't have a lot of cognitive development or their physical ability to kind of maneuver themselves out of an abuse situation. But they groom the environment. So they groom co-workers, they groom parents, they make friends, they curry favour, they're friendly, they do all of those things so that it creates a bias in people's perceptions and people's decision making. So what you might look at as in something you think, oh, gee, that person's a bit close to that, whatever. You might, if you already have a positive bias about someone because they've facilitated that.
It could be people like this. They're getting others to trust them.
Yeah.
They're putting in the yards to get the community, to get people around them to see them as upstanding or to be trustworthy.
Correct. And when you have, governance structures which perhaps overweight things like qualifications and blue cards and things, that's all they have to go on, isn't it? It's got the right quals, no criminal history, got the blue card, got all the things, got experience.
Seems to be a lot of discipline involved. right?
Absolutely.
This is not something you would see with most of your clients, Lars, who have been sex offending. You wouldn't describe them as disciplined necessarily.
Not to
There's
this
a real
degree.
individual difference variable here.
The amount of organisation and planning that would be involved to carry this out and successfully maintain that facade for this long would be quite extraordinary, quite remarkable. And also, you just think about how much time and effort outside of his work he would have to spend dedicated to pursuing and filming and uploading and doing all this kind of thing. It shows someone that was very, very determined. Had no sense of or perhaps conscience with regards to what he was doing.
I mean, just think about this. I mean, to get in a position of being, I want to get this right, is it director of a childcare centre? Is that the position?
Yeah, correct. That's what he was when they arrested him.
So on top of, I mean, this is someone who must have been very competent otherwise in the job in providing care and running accounts, managing staff. This is someone who is presumably competent in the normal business activities of someone running a childcare centre to get into that kind of position, no?
You would think so, yeah, absolutely.
But it's all, well, we're presuming linked to this interest.
Yeah, sexual deviancy is the motivator for wanting to continue to put yourself in those environments. Because if you weren't motivated to offend, if you were motivated to stop or to get help or to not do that, you certainly, and you had that problem, you're a pedophile, you would not be working in a childcare centre.
We're assuming
You
that,
had that
this,
insight,
though, aren't we?
yeah.
We're assuming that this is the source of the offending, this pedophilic interest.
Yes.
No?
You can infer pedophilia from behaviour, even if an offender denies it. And lots of people do, actually. But this kind of offending, alleged offending, is, I mean, an inference is fairly rock solid in terms of what's going on there.
When we would do an evaluation for court or for some kind of tribunal, when we're trying to answer the question of deviant sexual interest, the majority of individuals that have to go through that assessment process will caveat it, will and will deny it, will say that there are
the interest part.
Yeah, we'll say that there are other kinds of reasons why they did what they did. They were having a bad day, they were taking drugs, they were stressed or something. But when you actually sit down and then start to try to do a timeline on it, and you start to look at what's the actual evidence say in terms of what we know, the more that evidence accumulates to show that the person has
This interest was already
and
there.
deliberately pursued this and returned to it time and time again.
So they might say these things, but then you're like, well, why are you involving yourself in Boy Scouts from the age of whenever, and surrounding yourself with such and such, and
Yeah, correct.
behaviour gives it away. This is what you're saying, Shay. And ultimately, the behaviour is a big clue.
Yeah, absolutely. And in this case, I mean, I think it's unequivocal that given whether or not it's exclusive or not, we don't know, because we don't know enough about him, and that just refers to whether or not being attracted to prepubescent children is his only sexual interest. I mean, if he goes to trial, or if he's found he pleads guilty, or whatever the outcome is at court, there'll be a lot more detailed information come out, because it's a public process, right? So everybody can get access to that.
So there seems to be a sort of in the media a sort of thing of and I wonder with him, but also in other cases like this, there's this sort of almost upstanding kind of reputation that can be preceding people like this, that, I don't know, they're known as, they're protected by the community, or, other people surrounding them would stand in and say, well, this person's a very trusted person because they've got a track record, or they've been this, whatever it is, the scout master for 20 years and, all these things. I mean, do you find that people like this, they put themselves in these positions and they might earn a reputation of sorts of being kind, caring, legitimate person?
Yeah, look, I think part of the problem is where if you have people who have that experience of them who haven't been a victim of them, that it's quite shocking and it's almost unbelievable for them to think that person could have done that to somebody else, because he won't have offended against every single child he's ever worked with or come across for various reasons, But so you will have parents or colleagues or whatever who've worked with him in the past probably really struggle to integrate what's been
this
printed about it. Yeah.
And do people like this, I guess I'm curious, because I'm seeing it through the lens of Schema, and I'm already thinking about at least one mode when you're talking about this. So for me, I'm thinking about the kind of manipulating mode. When you're talking about grooming the child, grooming the parents, grooming the workplace. Like, is this someone who's strategic about these things?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Definitely.
I mean,
Yeah.
some of the clients, the offenders who I've evaluated will have a very, if we kind of distinguish this individual from, say, someone who is really dysregulated and impulsive and chaotic, and their offending seems to be the sexual offending seems to be part of this chaotic, impulsive, antisocial sort of lifestyle that's just rolling on through life. This is an individual who doesn't look like he has any of that, and he wouldn't have it.
Psychology, we talk about personality traits and so-called cluster B traits.
Yeah.
There's more erratic kind of impulsive traits. This
So
doesn't come up so far, at least in this case.
No, it doesn't look like it at all. You would think that if it did, or he had those kinds of really prominent traits, like he would probably have been flagged a lot earlier. But from a schema perspective, the men that I've evaluated and assessed who fit this kind of profile will typically have a very, very significant conning manipulator. They will have a very significant detached self-soother. So a conning manipulator, for those who are still getting to know the lingo of schema therapy, forensic schema therapy, it's like a mode where, the purpose of the mode is to use deception and conning to be able to achieve a particular objective, whatever that might be for them. Typically, individuals, when they're in the conning manipulator mode, they know what it feels like. They are pushing an agenda and an idea to try to manipulate a situation to create a particular outcome.
Manipulate others.
Manipulate others, of course. And a very powerful detached self-soother as well for individuals like this, because they return time and time again to this. And I think for some individuals who struggle with pedophilia, or some individuals who struggle with child molestation, will often use sex as a way of trying to soothe themselves and manage their emotional states. But for someone like this, who has clearly, over a long, long period of time, pursued this, despite whatever's going on in his life, you would have to look at it that this is an individual that probably is seeking this because he pursues it. This is his interest, and he's using all these overcompensating mode to control and create situations and groom the parents and groom the children and groom his co-workers to be able to give a particular impression of him, so that he can create opportunities to do this thing in the workplace.
To gain access, presumably.
Yeah, access and opportunity.
Yeah, so I think I have worked with clients with similar, who are pedophiles with very similar repetitive offending. So they go in and out of prison for this, and they're adept at grooming and manipulating people, and playing down the level of their interest. So they groom everyone in the system, including the therapist, including people like me. But their profile often is, I think, that there is also what is not so obvious, but what I guess with some of my clients in that space I've come to realize is a big self-aggrandizing mode. Mm-hmm. And there's this element of the thrill of offending in plain sight, being on the precipice of nearly being caught, but not being caught, is so intoxicating and highly arousing to people. Like there's that self-stimulator mode. It's often more intoxicating than the actual offending sometimes. Mm-hmm. And there's this self-aggrandizer sense of, I'm cleverer than you, the superiority element of it. Yeah. Because you are offending over there in the corner against a 3-year-old child while your co-worker is 5 meters from you. Mm. There's a big aggrandizing element to just how good I am at doing this.
This really comes up most times when there's a conning manipulator, not all the time, but it really does correspond. We often see that aggrandizing mode, is what you're saying. And it comes up for these kinds of cases too.
And with often some of the guys I've worked with that kind of profile often have their schema profile, or their early maladaptive schema is very much sometimes, the social isolation stuff and lonely child. They have a point where it's kind of like there's no one ever will, they can't get their needs met. So they sort of give themselves permission to indulge in that desire.
So in some ways we are inferring a lot, but we speak beyond this case as necessary. We don't know that there was a self-stimulator part or something.
No.
What strikes me, though, is this, we talk about being disciplined, Lars, and it seems like there's different profiles. So if we talked about the more erratic, impulsive pathway, what's striking to me as a lay observer is it's almost obsessive. There's a sort of dedication to this that you'd usually see in folks, I don't know, finishing off a university degree and putting into their work and things.
Often guys like this have had early exposure to sexual things, and so the onset of their sexual regulation problems is very early on, at least in early adolescence, if not earlier, even in childhood. And so they're part of incorporating sexual acting out behavior or sexual outlets is actually just a part of their lifestyle. So you and I might not think of it like that, but it actually is just forms. If you think about, your life as a pie chart, their chunk of pie for sexual kind of stuff is just much bigger. And so it's almost like the concept of not having that kind of in their life sometimes is an unthinkable thing.
You're saying there's identity issues, like who am I and stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and the function that sexual stuff can play can be, multi sort of faceted in terms of the purpose it serves for them or the needs that it gets met.
You mentioned this self-aggrandizer mode.
Yeah.
So for the audience, if we haven't talked about this much, this kind of mode is a mode that is interested in feeling sort of powerful and on top, maybe to feel better than others or something like this. So you're saying that for some of these guys, this is a part of the motivation and the feeling powerful.
Yeah, well, it's part of the modus operandi, so it's part of the formulation. Whether or not that comes about, it's a chicken and the egg a little bit, unless you interview someone to know, whether or not that comes about as a process of getting away with it and thinking, wow, I'm good at this, right? I mean, it's not a great skill to have, but they can sometimes see it that way.
Yeah.
Or whether or not it comes about, in a different way.
I think in my experience with guys who have a prominent self-aggrandizer in that space, it's usually come secondary after, because they start their experience, Rob, I mean, unless they're completely psychopathic, and this guy doesn't, I mean, he certainly sounds he's got psychopathic characteristics, but he also doesn't fit the profile completely. These guys come from backgrounds in a lot of cases where they feel misunderstood and unattuned and not seen or heard perhaps, and part of that might be because of the home environment that they grow up in. Another part of it might be because they have to carry this early on and recognize that actually they feel and experience the world differently.
They're disconnected usually.
Yeah, and they can't share that, they can't communicate about it, because if very early on, I mean, if you're a child molester, if you're a pedophile, I mean, you go in any kind of social context and it doesn't carry a great deal of goodwill if you identify as that. So I think that for some of these individuals, they carry this around hidden and it comes out in some kind of way. And the self-aggrandizer element, I think, becomes a way of compensating for something of the fact of feeling that you are cast out. Or
I mean, is it even to the degree of, are you saying, Lars, that a lot of these guys carry a sort of real inner critic experience?
Some will, I think, in my experience, definitely.
Do you know what I mean? Like
some don't. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting. We were just talking before about you're saying the discipline. There are subtypes of pedophiles, pedophile subtypes, and one of those subtypes is known as a seduction preferential pedophile. So these are individuals who have an entrenched and preferential interest in children, young children, and they will pursue and seduce young children, and they'll groom them typically with attention, affection, and gifts, and over time they will gradually introduce sexual behavior. And often they will have formed some kind of relationship or connection to a child, and the child will have formed some kind of connection to them, obviously, and will almost be willing to trade sexual contact for this kind of affection because it's been introduced by the adult. It's obviously not consensual, but it's how they're groomed and how they're manipulated into that situation. And for these individuals, this subtype of pedophile, we know that they are masters of seduction. They are masters at manipulation, conning manipulators, and they are particularly good at being able to identify children that are going to be vulnerable. And these are children who will come from dysfunctional backgrounds where they might feel neglected or have problems at home. Mum and dad might have split up. And
do you think they're selecting targets carefully often?
They're very attuned.
I use this as an example. And these people are like a scoutmaster and they've got access to children. I mean, are they strategically picking targets? Are they letting some go thinking this is too risky?
Oh, absolutely. Without a doubt.
Yeah, victim characteristics are a real thing in terms of what people will pursue or not.
Like, so such and such comes, they drop off their kids and they're really, really in tune and they're really, really, there's no issues, these kind of things. This would be seen as a riskier victim. to target
Yes.
versus the kid who their family problems, domestic violence at home, these kind of things. Yeah, broken family.
Or they will be vulnerable.
And
in
what are these
some way.
victim
It
characteristics?
doesn't
Maybe we could
necessarily
start
have to be.
there.
They can be emotionally needy. They can be struggle with friendships in some way. Something that gives someone a way to manipulate and groom them. And we know when we interview these guys that they will be very precise, particularly in terms of being able to target and pursue particular kinds of individuals.
I guess I'm curious too about, because partly I see this within the Schema model, like you look at someone like this and there's the dedication and discipline involved in non-offending, the non-offending part of this, which is to be a really competent, knowledgeable person in the field, right? To get a job like this, to finish university degrees, to all these things. So I'm tempted to think about it through the lens of something like a perfectionistic over-controller, that there'd be a part that's focused on being really competent at the job, primarily, finishing a university degree, all those things, doing all the assignments. Do you see that, Bo, or not?
Yeah.
I mean, at the core of things must have been a competent person.
Yeah.
So this would fit within the model as a sort of perfectionistic over-controller mode.
Yeah.
Right? That there's an extreme competence about this person on the one hand. Objectively finishing things like degrees, right?
Being able to maintain the facade in multiple locations over time. So this is a person that has got a patter and that has got a routine and has got a story and a narrative for explaining what he does and why he does it, and has been able to pick out people that are vulnerable to it and people that can groom and nurture to be able to create these opportunities. So the self-aggrandizer is, I think, the perfectionistic over-controller. You'd think that would be relevant?
Particularly to the more mundane work aspects, like running budgets and these things. There's a side of him that's doing the job, and getting
perhaps also to the offending, Rob. I mean, that's the scary thing about it as well.
Say more about it. What do you mean? We're sitting here, we don't know, but we're just looking at the behavior. And a client like this, I'd be thinking there's an obsessive element where he's doing the job really well to get promotions and things like that. But then you're saying that this side might have been applied to the offending. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
You don't want to bring scrutiny upon yourself in a negative way. You want to, and it may be a form of the grooming. So if you do your job extremely well, you do everything to the letter, and you are viewed very favourably by your employers. Yeah, beyond reproach. You create what I mentioned before. You create a bias. There's actually some Griffith University academics had published a thing online where they talk about that from the Griffith Criminology Institute. They talk about this idea of creating grooming creates bias in adults, and they do it by currying favour, so people are less likely to scrutinise things.
So this would be more the conning manipulator. This is the side that is trying to change the perception of others in a positive light, right?
Yeah, or at least not draw negative attention to himself, I guess. So if he was like a failing childcare worker, he'd have lots of eyes on him.
And things.
Yeah, and you don't want that if you want to be able to continue to offend. You also want to be in charge.
You're the overlord of these things.
So you don't have anyone overseeing you. If you're the director, do you? On a day-to-day basis,
no,
you don't
he
have
just
any.
Might be, I don't know, who knows? Maybe he's accountable to like financial people or investors or
correct. You would be
level.
Accountable to the owner, at least someone who's going to come in over him. But on a day-to-day operational basis, you're the one in charge. There's a hierarchy there. And so if you climb to the top of that tree, you're less scrutinised on a day-by-day basis, which creates opportunity. It creates legitimacy in terms of, well, I'm doing this because I'm in charge.
Apparently that he'd worked at other childcare centres in between what's the known offending, and did not allegedly, to what we know, offend at certain places in between. And this has come up a lot in articles, in things like major media, and that folks might find this kind of weird. Like, how might that happen? How is it that there might be gaps in people like this?
Yeah, well, context is king. So my guess would be that there was something about those environments that just had better governance, so less opportunity. Even the physical design of the environment can make a difference. And that's a well-known concept of, situational crime prevention when they design buildings and toilet blocks and things like that. You don't design places with
risk.
We don't design places where people can't see. There's not line of sight. It's not open. Yeah. Because that in itself is a deterrent, a situational deterrent.
There might have been an element of trial and error that someone like this moves around and they're trying to find the best spot or the most opportunistic spot.
Yeah, so what it shows you is he's in control, right? Because maybe you're not offending in a place where there's a high likelihood of detection. Maybe it had CCTV. So,
or they had some policy, some banal policy that there were two
people in the room at all times. Blah, blah, blah.
And that would just mean that there wasn't the opportunity to be able to be alone. I just want to return to your question to this idea around perfectionism, perfectionistic over control, because we know that for certain kind of offenders, sex offenders, they can be very ritualistic in their offending pattern. And typically this comes from the experience where they have a very particular kind of fantasy that they play out in their mind before they actually engage in the offending behavior. And in that fantasy, there needs to be certain kind of characteristics that are hitting the mark, so to speak, for what they want. And each go at offending is an attempt to try to replicate that kind of fantasy for these individuals. So they might have the victim looking a particular way, positioned in a particular way, doing a particular thing. There might be certain kinds of objects in the, area, perhaps.
This is like generally with like fetishes and things, do you mean? Or?
Yeah.
It's done in a ritualistic way. There's a certain way it has to happen.
Yeah, it has to happen in a particular way. And then there's that kind of replication of trying to get the offending to sort of look just right or be just in the way that they need it to be. And for someone like this, I would imagine that would certainly play an element to it. The curious thing about it is that he's gone about producing this material and shared it on the internet, which suggests that there's some other element apart from his own gratification that he's sought to.
So why does someone like this share things on the internet? So he's there, let's say, in this position, doing these things. Why produce material? Like why videotape? This is evidence. Like this would be the downfall. But why do people do this?
So that they can replay it. And these men, are highly aroused by watching offending. And typically what they report is that they use it as a masturbatory aid, like a stimulation aid, and it can be repetitive over and over. Then sharing it on the internet, there's lots of motivations that people might do that. I mean, believe it or not, these sort of deviant subgroups are everywhere on the internet. And so there's lots of opportunity to have status and to feel included in a group just like you, where you can talk about your deepest, darkest fantasies and you're actually not rejected for it because other people are doing exactly the same thing.
You might even be held up in esteem.
Yeah, you can climb the ladder by sharing novel material. This is how child exploitation material on the internet works. There's a hierarchy to it. So once people, you get in the club by sharing something and then you're a member, and they sometimes have tests that they make people do to make sure they're trying to be not police and all this kind of stuff. But once you get in, it's very gratifying. People report it being very gratifying because they feel like they belong. And really it's just deviancy feeding deviancy. It's like a giant big fertilizer paddock for it. And if you want to get
to the silo or something.
Yeah, it is. And if you want to get to the top and you want to get status, and they give themselves these like those sort of status symbols as monikers that they're called, like obviously not their real name.
Give me an example. What sort of things would you?
Sometimes I read something recently. There's another case in the Northern Territory of a man being arrested, and it was a Greek. It was in reference to like a big dog in Greek mythology, and this was a man who actually was arrested for killing animals. And so it was, and he was sharing it on the internet and sexually assaulting them as well. And his moniker on the internet was about being this, big dog. That was his moniker and what he was known for, and so he had. It does show a level
of aggrandizement. I mean, from the surface, you're like, I'm the, this is the connotation, isn't it?
And it's like a completely alternate universe to the average person. But when people get in it, and it's intoxicating to people to be so prized by others when often in their normal life they're not.
There's an aspect of that, but I think also what drives it is the pursuit for more material and more content. So I think that,
and that's compulsive often.
So this is another element, right?
Yeah.
You're saying, Lars, that if one enters this world, they gain access to other materials, more material.
the price of entry is that you have to be able to contribute new material to the group. And if you can, then you're in, and then you can access other people's material.
So we're talking about the dark web, right? At this stage,
It is on the dark web, obviously, but it not necessarily exclusively. No,
It's everywhere.
It's everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, it is. It's on mainstream platforms actually that you can find it quite easily. Which is, I mean, Australia's trying to lead the way. The e-safety commissioner enforcing platforms to monitor their own platform and get it off. It's a world first, which is pretty impressive. But it's a problem because it is literally 2 clicks away on mainstream platforms. Most people don't realise that. But a lot of people that get arrested for child exploitation material, they're not dark web masters.
No.
They're on things like Kik and Reddit and things like that.
Yeah.
And Australia, I mean, I'm totally naive, it seems to me the AFP and the police involved are, in Australia, fairly sophisticated in picking up some of these things, no? Yeah,
look, Argos, which is our local police detection agency for child exploitation material just down the road here, we can nearly see the building from the office. They're sort of well renowned in terms of leaders in this field.
And Australians are quite, our resources are very finely tuned on this.
Yeah, absolutely. We're very well respected worldwide in this field, and I think they have great success. But it's, I mean, in comparison though to what's out there, it's impossible for the police to police everything. But Australia certainly does a very good job. And like I said, I think the changes with the e-safety commissioner trying to mandate that large companies actually police their own platforms, and there'll be penalties if they don't. If they allow child exploitation material to be hosted on their platform.
You wouldn't want to be on that group. You want to be in that category.
Is massive. But other
imagine
countries...
Google or something,
well, that's right.
Getting on that list, the naughty list of people who allow these things,
What's fascinating about the way this individual was captured, if we go by what's written in the media, is that they were able to pinpoint the location of a childcare centre based on an image that he uploaded that had a particular kind of, was it blanket or pattern?
Sheet. Yeah, pattern instead of sheet.
Pattern sheet in the background. So the way the police do this is that they are able to scan these images and look for identifiable characteristics within those pictures to be able to pinpoint them to a location so that they can then investigate further and obviously put a stop to this stuff happening.
So allegedly this is how they've caught the guy, that the material with a sheet in the background, particular sheet, and eventually this has tracked them back somewhere.
Yeah, the AFP, so the Australian Federal Police, and Argos came across an image uploaded to the dark web in 2014, and it was of a child being sexually abused. And the whole point of it is they're trying to identify the children to save them. That's what the police's top priority is. So they have a thing called the International Victim Identification Database, and police forces around the world can upload images onto that to seek help from other agencies to try to facilitate identification of these victims. And so there was no luck with this for many years. But in 2022, 8 years down the track, somehow or other, officers from Argos found a detail in one of these pictures, and it was this unusual sheet pattern. And so they somehow tracked that down to a sheet manufacturer in Brisbane, and that manufacturer apparently only ever supplied those sheets to 2 childcare centres in Brisbane. And so that's how the police went bang. That's how they got their opening. And This man was working at one of those childcare centres, and then it all unfolded. And what has also been reported in the press is that apparently in the 2 years prior to him being arrested, 2 complaints had been made against him at the childcare centre by co-workers and made to police. And police had investigated and dismissed it as a lack of evidence, so they didn't pursue it. So this man would have been interviewed.
So little red flags here and there.
Well, that's a big red flag, yeah.
Big red flags, actually.
Yeah, and no evidence because it was he said, she said evidence. So the childcare workers...
It's never been enough to to maybe get rid of him out of the job or whatever.
No, it didn't reach the level of evidence of being able to pursue a criminal charge. So nothing.
But even beyond that, not just pursue a criminal charge, but get them out of the job.
No, that's right. So he would have looked all of those people in the eye and just bald-faced lied, and people believed him, and that was the end of it. And that happened twice before this image was identified on.
Because that's a long time. 2014?
Yeah,
To
2014, and it was
2022.
picked up in 2022, and apparently in 2020 a police complaint was made against him, and in 2021 a police complaint was made against him, and
So
both
it's a
of those
level of
were
police complaint.
dismissed.
So that's quite serious. I mean, someone's going to the police.
Yeah.
They've got big concerns.
Well, it's an automatic notification in Queensland that if you have a concern, it has to go to the police. You don't get to do it in-house.
Okay.
Yeah, and so the police are notified. They've come out and interviewed both parties and believed his
Do
version.
we know what the story? I mean, is this been in the public?
Yeah,
domain?
it has been.
So what
One of
sort
them-
of things have been in the complaints?
So the two things that I read was the first instance was a childcare worker witnessed allegedly this man going in, and he'd built a cubby with one of the kids who were 3 or 4 years old, and she said that she witnessed him leaning over the child and kissing the child, and she'd made a complaint about that because it's not what an educator should do, and and when
It just
he
looked
was
weird. It looked wrong. It looked
he'd kissed the child like they're not meant to do that. So
right.
she so he'd crawled in there and in this cubby, and then had leant over the child and kissed the child, and she's informed the police, and the police came out and interviewed, assessed it, and what he'd said was, she must have been mistaken, because what I did was I bent down and whispered in the child's ear, "Wake up now." So they've believed his version over her version, and the child's too young probably to give an account.
Yeah.
And so that gets dismissed. So the following year, his boss, the childcare person in charge of him, was interviewing him, and there was apparently a child in the room with them, and in front of the boss. Now this is the self-aggrandizing thing, right? In front of the boss, he's rubbing the child's arm, and then he leans. He's and the educator's looking at him while she's interviewing him for a performance review or something, I think, and she's looking at that thinking that's not normal. Like, we don't do that. That's against
It's a boundary
the rules.
violation. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's doing it in front of her, and she's the boss. That
There's
was
some of
also
the-
reported, and it was also dismissed as a lack of evidence.
And
But
if
then
we
the next year, this all blew up.
Right.
If we think about some of the modes we discussed previously in relation to the self-aggrandizer, perhaps, you almost wonder, like, this is continuing to do those kinds of behaviors in that particular moment, knowing all of this stuff has gone on, knowing that you've been doing this since 2007. You would think that it would be very difficult for someone in that situation to not also be getting some kind of "I'm cleverer than you."
I mean,
kind of buzz.
does this lead to sort of sloppiness?
I don't know. I mean,
I think it leads to risk taking. I think
that
it
seems
leads
sloppy
to
in a
arrogance.
way.
Yeah, arrogance.
there's an
and thinking,
arrogance and a self-aggrandizing.
I'm better than everybody else. I can do
But this
this.
can't
I
be
can get
good
over
for
it.
the, that seems to be drawing attention, right, to things.
Yeah, possibly. But I mean, on the other hand, if you're self-aggrandizing and you're a cunning manipulator, you're thinking, I fooled the police twice. I fooled my boss. I fooled the other educators. Like you kind of, there's a little bit of some, omnipotent kind of thinking going on there.
Well, I guess with overcompensation as well, it's like, you're putting out there this behavior that's so, you're so confident in yourself.
Correct.
That other people pick up, well, this couldn't possibly happen.
Yeah.
I mean, he's happy to sit here and cuddle a kid in front of you. I mean,
Exactly. You are offending in plain sight.
right? Do you know what I mean? Like this is.
So there you go. Yeah. Yeah.
Does that make sense? Like it's so.
It is.
It's overcompensation. Like, so rather than be all hiding and sort of acting, it's like you're acting beyond reproach.
Correct. And I've had other clients who've had decades long history of child offending, who have that, and that's the mode they're in. The risks that they will take because they've gotten away with it for so long are almost staggering, where you think that's unbelievable someone would do that. But when you look at that accumulative history of having fooled everyone around you when you're doing something in your role, in your position as either whether it's a childcare worker or a priest or whatever your role is, you kind of get a bit of a godlike complex.
So what I'm wondering, when, going back to this thing about there were periods where there were no, allegedly, at least they can't tell, there was not activity despite working somewhere. Yeah.
Yep.
And your idea was this was opportunity, and that's probably right to a degree. But I do wonder about tactical things as well with the conning manipulator, meaning is there a period sometimes for these people where they have to be beyond reproach in order to gain people's trust? Do you know what I mean? Like, do they sometimes, are there times when there'll be no offending because they're trying to get the trust of the community?
Oh,
Yes, I
yeah,
would say, yeah.
yeah.
You know what I mean? Do you know what I'm getting at? Like, so
It's a strategy.
You got to think, going back to this idea that a preferential seductive pedophile subtype, which is around grooming, identifying, pursuing, and nurturing those relationships in a way to be able to create the opportunity for sexual contact and get away with it. So yeah, absolutely. Targets would be picked, and I would imagine pursued and nurtured over a longer period of time. But I think that a much more prosaic explanation, if he hasn't offended over long periods of time in particular contexts, I think a more prosaic explanation will be that there'll be something in that environment which makes it very, very risky or very dangerous, or is just not possible.
what do we know about
No, he's not
the
married.
relationship status and things?
Not
Yeah,
married.
there's nothing reported on that, so it's difficult to know. There's not a lot in the media about his background at all, other than his work history.
Do we know anything about where he is at the moment? And can we comment on that sort of thing? Is there anything in the public?
I think he's in Walston Correctional Centre, which is a protection prison where people who are in need of protection from mainstream prisoners are incarcerated. So often, child sex offenders typically all go to that prison here in southeast Queensland. Anyone like if you're a high profile person, like, I don't know, politician, ex-cop or something like that, you all go there as well.
And
Yeah.
even within the prison there, individuals such as this fellow would be fairly high profile and well recognized, and would have to be within protection.
Would he be isolated in a cell on his own?
Quite possibly. For
Possibly,
his own
yes.
protection, probably only since the law changed in Queensland where they could name him, because obviously he hasn't been convicted yet, and so the law used to be in Queensland until someone was, committed for trial, or they pleaded guilty. You couldn't name people who had sex offence charges. You could with any other crime, mind you, including murder, but not sex offending.
Really?
So yeah,
So I'm
so
more concerned about the reputation of
yeah, that's
alleged
what
people.
correct. And so that was recommended in a task force report a few years ago to change that. And in fact, it's brought it in line with the rest of Australia, because in all other states that's they do name people. So sort of the stroke past midnight that law was passed in Queensland, this man was named in the media, and so the details about him have come out more publicly.
And this is obviously a very infamous case now already.
Yeah.
I mean, are there other infamous kind of cases? I mean, what kind of people end up in this environment?
The protection from protection.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in Queensland, I mean, a case that comes to mind, which is again a huge high-profile case, is the man who killed the little boy Daniel Morecambe. So Brett Cowan. So somebody like him, he would perpetually live in protection from protection in prison, because I guess prisons are not nice places, and there's a bit of a hierarchy of status, and people who are pedophilic. Sort of extreme offenders or child killers, are considered to be sort of on the bottom rung. And there's status also in prison, because it's a deviant subculture. There's status in harming people like that in jail.
I
So
think
that's why the government has a duty of care to ensure that, that they survive jail. And so that's why we have this protection prisons. And then within protection, you have protection. Sometimes from protection. It's crazy.
Protection from protection.
I know.
Someone
It all
like
sounds very
this-
protective, people.
I know.
Yeah.
Someone like this would actually have a target on their back simply because of who he is, obviously, but also because he, being able to harm him in some kind of way would elevate their status. This is, I guess, what you're talking about, Shay, isn't it? Within the wider prison community. So
there's been a lot of changes for this fella, right? In the last few months.
Yeah, well, he has been assaulted, according to the news as well, that he was hot watered, which is a bit of a common assault in prison. So people, are allowed to have jugs to boil water to make cups of tea, and so they will throw a jug of boiling water on someone. And apparently, he's been assaulted in that way and had to go off to the hospital for burns treatment.
They usually mix the water with sugar or jam as
in
a
order
way, so it
to.
becomes sticky. So
Oh,
the
right.
hot water will
It's
become
adhesive. Yeah.
it
Oh,
becomes
God.
sticky, and
Like
then
a sticky hot substance. Like,
yes, so
Yeah.
it becomes like a type of it will stick to the skin.
So the legislation in Queensland has had, had immediate effect of in fact, creating the environment where this man has actually been seriously harmed as well. So, and I mean, that's not shouldn't be the outcome of our justice system either.
yeah,
And he's not been convicted. So there's
that's right.
these, there's lots of awful
There's
outcomes
lots
all
going
around.
on. He's not very popular in there
No.
by the sounds of things, by reports. So, Lars, Shay, you guys are involved in treatment of offenders, like this. So, some wouldn't be like this, others would be like this, having these big records and things. What's going on for a guy like this? They've had this career, they've been caught, life has changed. They've now got a target on their back. They're in prison. I mean, I guess, what are the chances of rehabilitation? Do people like this come before you for, in terms of, is there an impetus that people like this should be treated? Do you see people like this for therapy?
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? What's going on for a
Yeah.
guy like this? Is he depressed now?
He'll be
For people like
traumatized.
this. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
He'll
He'd
be
be,
absolutely
Is
traumatized.
he anxious? Is he sleeping? I mean, people like this, once they're caught, they're in jail. I mean, target on their back. What is life like?
yeah, life's a nightmare. I mean, like very, very difficult for people. His entire life has changed where you have no power, no control in jail over anything. If he pleads guilty or he's found guilty of these crimes, then, I mean, some of these crimes attract a life sentence, and it's very difficult. I mean, you can't preempt the criminal justice outcome, but it's very difficult to see how this man could escape without an extreme sentence. And so
I was
guess
looking at the figures, right?
Yeah.
There's some of the things, whatever it is, there's 180 counts of something that carries a life sentence.
Correct. So it's very difficult, you would seem to think, how this man could escape that. But I mean, that's for the courts, the presiding judge to decide. But you look at it and you think, so his life will be in prison. He will be somebody who is,
if he's convicted. There's one count that's almost like if for some reason these other ones fail, and then there's like one count of producing child abuse material contrary to Section the Crimes Act, which carries a maximum of 10 years. So that was kind of strange. You got all these counts, like you got 68 counts, 42 counts, 69 counts.
Yeah.
And then they thought, we better just put one count of this other thing that we're sure we'll get him on, just in case. I don't know.
Well,
do you know what I mean?
Typically going through the court process, there's a bit of negotiation between the prosecutors and the defense lawyers. So there'll be negotiation in terms of saying, well, if you agree to this, then when we'll drop this, we'll change this to that, so that they can find something which the alleged perpetrator is happy to plead guilty to or can plead guilty to.
Yeah. And in Queensland, that's called the statement of facts. When you have both sides finally agree on what is the statement of facts. This is if someone pleads guilty, of course. And then if someone goes to trial, I guess, they have to prove it. Prosecutors have to prove all this kind of stuff. Having said that, when you have digital evidence, it's extremely difficult to deny, isn't it? I mean, it's,
when he's you imagine someone like this is in the video and all those things.
Exactly. So you kind of look at it and think it's perhaps not the most difficult case to prosecute compared to a lot of other sex offences, which are really hard to prosecute.
But in your on your question, Rob, about whether he's treatable or you can treat this, I mean, someone like this is unlikely to be released into the community any day soon if he's, of course, found convicted. But I mean, there are a lot of individuals who have much lesser offences and who struggle with these kinds of issues and problems in the community who do need help with being able to overcome and manage it. And for individuals who are genuine pedophiles, you can't expect that can ever be cured. I know in treatment with these guys, the goal of treatment is not to cure them of pedophilia, because it's not possible to do that. We don't know how to do that. It's just simply about helping them develop ways of managing these urges and impulses in ways that don't put them at risk or put other people, kids at risk, obviously, and help them to be able to, forge lives that are fulfilling and meaningful enough for them to persist in managing these impulses over the longer term.
I mean, do you find that there are a population of people that you might think of as pedophiles and having this kind of interest who would never offend? You know, who don't ever offend?
Yes, we've in our clinic here in Paddington, we've certainly have people from time to time who have never been involved in the criminal justice system. They're not subject to charges or anything, and they've never committed a crime, but they have a pedophilic sexual interest. In my experience, they're often men who are deeply depressed and they have like melancholic they just roll on in a sort of a low state of depression, often very functional, university educated, professional men who feel extremely bad about their sexual interests. It's ego dystonic for them. And in fact, finding a place that can help them understand it and provide some treatment for it is like, it's like winning the lottery for people. Nowhere else can they even talk about it, not to their partners, not to their GP, not to their families. You can't bring it up at a barbecue. Oh, I'm having a few problems with this. Often people that have just, held this, what they see as a dirty, horrible secret for years, and they don't want it. But there's often men who are not distorted about what's going on. They own it. They're accountable for it. They don't sexualize children, and they see children as children. And so they have very healthy adult, very good protective factors, and they're empathic. They're people that don't want to harm people, and they recognize the problem lies with them.
So an offender's personality is a very important variable in whether they go on to offend, regardless of the sexual interest, right, that they might have. If they're basically a compassionate, healthy adult, they're much more unlikely to offend against children.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very protective
despite
factor.
this kind of proclivity, interest, whatever you want to call it.
Definitely. Absolutely. And if they don't have distortions or they don't sexualize children, because that's a large part of when men commit sex offences, these people are completely understand, kids are kids. They're not little sexual objects, and they're not trying to have a relationship with you, so they don't want to cross the boundary.
Yeah.
And they don't.
It's all this conning manipulator and all these, self-aggrandizer and disconnection and all these things we might think of as schema modes that are driving the personality variables.
Yeah, correct. Because sexual deviancy in and of itself is not necessarily going to make someone commit a crime. It's the overcompensating modes, the conning manipulator, the self-aggrandizer, the impulsive
It allows them to do those things.
Yeah,
to turn it from something that they think about into action, into crime, into abuse.
Correct, because you're perpetrating harm on somebody else, and they're allowing themselves to do that.
That's a boundary. Like that's a massive boundary. It's one thing to be in your mind, but it's another thing to actually hurt somebody.
Correct. Versus somebody who has this problem and they never step over the line because they're not people that want to cause harm.
So come on, Lars. You know the stats on this. You were. Your self-aggrandizer mode was telling me before, right? Or perfectionistic over-control, or one of those. You know the stats on this. What are the stats in the community of this kind of interest in males and females?
So the research, when they try to evaluate this question, they usually ask something like this. Have you ever had a fantasy relating to this, or if there were
this is a confidential survey?
Yeah, they're trying to ask these questions, so they ask them in various in different ways. And one of the ways, if you were absolutely certain that you would never get caught, would you XYZ? And interestingly enough, when they've asked these kinds of questions in the general population, it's between 3 to 9% of men report having had a sexual interest in children or engaged in some kind of fantasy with a prepubescent about a prepubescent child. 3 to 9%, so 1 in 10, potentially 1 in 20, and 1 to 4% of women, so 1 in 20.
So it's much less likely in women, but not impossible.
Not impossible, no. Surprisingly, I must say.
So we can sort of wrap up after this. Let's agree that when it gets to a point where someone is abusing others and kids, that they would be hopefully dealt with by the criminal justice system and in that system. For those that are potentially thinking about seeking help, Where does someone like this get help when they're at a stage where they have these feelings, these urges, but they're not at a stage of acting on them or hurting others? Where can people like this seek help?
Yeah, I think it's really hard for people. The feedback we've had from folks is that they just can't find help, and when, that it's not widely available, even when they're looking for it, it's really difficult. And they're scared to.
You can't just ring up, maybe. They don't feel you can ring up a place.
And people sometimes don't want to tell their GP either.
Yeah, part of what happens also when they go and see someone and they start talking about it, there's a real strong overreaction on behalf of the therapist or counsellor that they're seeing, and they immediately want to break confidentiality and report it to police, even though let me just be clear about this, they're not reporting that they're actually engaging in any offending or have offended. They're reporting that they perhaps struggle with this kind of urge or these kinds of fantasies that that causes them distress. So they have when they go and tell someone about it, there's a very strong punitive experience that they have.
Yeah. There's a podcast I listened to once called Hunting Warhead.
Hunting Warhead.
I don't know if you've listened to it.
I've never heard of that.
No, it's a cool name though.
But it's really in your field. You probably should listen to it. And I won't give it away, but it's one of these guys who was like a prolific child abuse, he used to produce child abuse material, and he ran the server. He ran the international server, and he ended up getting caught. But he told a story, and I don't know if it's true, but there were a couple of times in over time in this person's career, I think early on when he might have been about 20 or something, where he'd fronted up for therapy to say, like, I need help. This is getting out of control, and the moments were missed. That help wasn't really available. These kind of experiences, Lars, came up where it sort of slipped through the cracks, that it wasn't able to get help or that kind of thing. I can't remember exactly how that happened, but there was some inkling that this was a kind of excuse too, that was made by him. But he does tell a story of fronting up a couple of times trying to get help, and was basically told that we need to call the police, or we need this kind of stuff. So I guess I'm curious, we can finish off the question. Where does someone like this present for help?
You can come to us, but oftentimes, unfortunately, when people get
bit of a plug, Shay.
But when people get arrested, their lawyers should know where to send them. Good criminal lawyers will know where to send them.
Bread and butter. You get folks who are already in trouble, and then they.
But we will have people people can search and find it. Interestingly, what I think Germany has a really interesting approach to this, and they actually have a government-funded program called the Dunkelfeld Project, which allows people to access free mental health, confidential and anonymous, before to modify their behaviour before they offend. So this exact population, it's a prevention project for pedophilia. So they estimate the government's estimated somehow or other there could be 250,000 people with pedophilia in Germany. Statistically,
based on Lars statistics.
Well, that's probably correct based on Lars statistics. Actually, there it is.
If Germany has, I don't know, maybe they have 50 million people or something.
Yeah, Germany's a large,
and then you
big
apply
population.
Lars statistics.
So what? That's right. So they're probably correct, but that's a lot of people, right? So what they've tried to do is they've a government-funded thing where people can ring up and get a qualified therapist who understands the issue, and it's anonymous and confidential because they're trying to encourage people to get treatment before they offend. I'm not aware anywhere else in the world I've ever done this, but it's available. And I actually believe that even if you're in Australia, you could ring the service. I don't think it's limited to you have to be in Germany, but the German government funds it.
So really there's not a lot out there. There might be some sort of very specialist practices like yourself, where you would provide, if people present and they want help, you would have an open door.
Yes, correct. Forensic psychiatrists as well.
Yeah, and I think
they're another avenue.
There are a number of clinical psychologists now that specialize in sex therapy and that kind of thing, and I imagine that some of them would also
be dealing with these kind of cases.
We would deal with
offering help to those
paraphilias and urges and impulses that people struggle with or have.
From a really practical sense, if people are listening to this and they're interested, the Australian Psychological Society, if you go on the Find a Psych website. You can go to forensic psychology and you can click on whatever interest thing you're interested in.
Yeah.
And sexual offending is kind of one of the things on there. So that would bring up within your geographic location people who have clicked that as something that they work with. So you could go onto the APS Find a Psych website, and that is Australia. Yeah, that's Australia wide. So you could find someone in your region. But these days, there's also telehealth as well. So people have clients all over the place.
So they could go there, or they could just come to the Forensic and Clinical Psychology Centre in Paddington, Brisbane.
Or they could try out.
They could try out this German sort of prevention service.
Yeah, they could. Which
seek that out and find out what that's about.
Yeah.
All right, you guys. Sounds like I feel like we've gotten to the end of the track on this one for now, at least. We will be coming back in about a month and probably talking about another case and taking this kind of thing forward, and maybe a completely different area in a way. Yeah, we might actually come back to this one from time to time.
It'll be useful to maybe discuss a case in terms of breaking it down from a schema perspective with regards to working with someone, what the mode map might look like and how you might work with making sense of the offending behavior or specific offending behaviors.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah.
That sounds awesome.
Cool.
All right, you guys.
Thank you very much.
We'll catch you guys around the traps. See you in a month.
If you're interested in learning more about schema therapy, join us in a hero's journey, the Schema Therapy Sessions at schematherapytrainingonline.com.